Welcome to Scoop, where you get the scoop on this week's news. My name is Jenna, and this is SmartHER News. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Scoop on Monday, November 17th. I had to check the date there. It seems that time is just moving us by real fast. We're really getting close to the end of the year. I know that's actually not breaking news, but I feel like if I say it out loud, I'm less alone. So thank you so much for joining me today as we're going to rapidly move through a lot of the stories that are now back and active because Congress is back and actively in session. One of the big questions is, just because people are working, are they doing what you want them to do? And that's really ultimately the question for American politics overall, isn't it? Are the people that we elected to serve actually carrying out the will of the people? Or do we start seeing a political or elite class that breaks with the rest of America? And I'm thinking a lot about that as I'm seeing already the start of the anniversary of America's 250th birthday. Have you guys seen the new Ken Burns documentary that just launched? It was just this weekend on PBS. It's a multi-part series. Ken Burns does all these amazing historic documentaries. And so we're getting into it. And we know that although we will mark 250 years in America next year, we know that 1775 was a really important year that is very easy to forget because there's so much focus on 1776 and the Declaration of Independence. So if we think back 250 years ago, some of the questions that we're raising even now about American leadership are questions that were wrestled with so many years ago. And it's nice to be reminded of that. I know that maybe doesn't give us a lot of comfort because you'd like there to be, questions about leadership, but it's nice to get answers too. But the reality is that a lot of what we see in American politics and the relationship between the US government and its people has been an ongoing conversation and developing story for many, many years. And so we're both in a unique time where we have some unique topics that I'm going to give you a little bit of a cliff notes on today. That's what we do at SmartHER News. And also, some of the themes are familiar themes about representation and leadership and what does that actually look like. So I don't want to forget about that. Also, I don't want to forget about this. We have our live insiders on our chat today as I'm doing this broadcast. Our insiders provide support for us at SmartHER News. SmartHER News is vastly supported only by our audience members. So insiders are joining our insider group is a great way to do that. It's the price of a cup of coffee, cappuccino, once a month, and it changes our trajectory as a company. So if you're thinking about how do you better organize your year ahead, it's a really great way to think about how can you support independent media that you feel actually adds something to your life. And that's my whole goal here, is to prioritize you, add something to your life, make you love the news again. Why should you hate the news? The news should be something that we love. We live in a free society with a free press. So I think that's important. So thank you to our insiders, Barbara, and the rest of our insiders. Were having a lively chat that involved a lot of different topics, from margaritas to, was it frog soup? Do I have that right? There was all sorts of things. We were talking about Thanksgiving. We had a little chat before the show, but Barbara put this question up and said this: our foodie son is asking for new pans for Christmas. Okay, Barbara, I have a hot tip on this and a funny story to tell you before we get to the news. So, one of the great things about what's going on at SmartHER News right now is that we don't have to exclusively partner only with certain companies. Technology has allowed us that if we like something and that business is on an app called Shop My, I can tell you about that business. I can share something I love about it. And if you shop from that link because it's something that you need, then SmartHER News gets a nice little commission on it. And there's nothing weird. It's just like, hey, we think this helps us live smarter. We really like it. We think you're going to love it. And if you do and you buy it through the link, that's the only thing that you need to do, then you also support SmartHER News. So I got this pan sent to me, all right? A cooking pan. Now my family has done the whole, like, we're going to get rid of all the toxic things to a certain degree. We're going to get rid of the pans that could be, putting chemicals into our food that we never thought about until recently. And we got this whole new set. It was pretty pricey. And we cannot cook on it. And we have had it for like a year. We have used butter, oil, tallow. We have used all sorts. I mean, we've used everything to try to see, like, can we get it to be really good to cook on? And It's been terrible. Basically, everything sticks and it's really hard to clean. And it takes a really, really long time to heat up. Like it's just not useful. But we were trying, you guys were trying to be healthy. So anyhow, our place is a cookware line, sent me a pan. They're like, "Hey, you should try our pan." I was like, "Oh, I really need a new pan." All right, cute colors, that matters to me too. Not too pricey. Pans can be pricey, but not too crazy. All right. So they send me this pan. My husband has literally taken all of our pans out of our I have no pans in my house because he took them all out. He moved them all out to the garage. He says, "We're getting rid of every single one of these, and I'm buying our place pans." That's what happened. Heats up fast, non-stick, looks super cute. Apparently is healthier for you. So Barbara, I'm going to put that link in our podcast notes. I'll also put it on our insider newsletter so you could check it out. You guys get something like 40% off right now just because it's a Black Friday sale. And if you use our link, then again, you support Smarter News. So this resonated with me and I cannot gatekeep this because this has been a big topic of conversation in our household. So our place, Barbara, that's where you're going. It's again, great colors, easy to use, easy to clean, all the things. All right. So there's our place. They didn't pay me for that. I just really like it and I want to tell you about it. And that helps us live a little bit smarter. All right. We have a whole bunch of different topics to get to today. Thank you for my brief advertisements, my brief testimonial. But I'm telling you, I think there's something to this. I got the green one, by the way. A lot of different color choices. I thought green, Smarter News colors. I mean, I just went with for it. Okay. Before we get to the tough stuff, I have to show you a brand new poll that just came out. I don't love political polls because they're backwards looking. And often there's a question about who's the sample population. But for some polling that's talking about cultural phenomenons or the way the American people think, I always take a second look at those because sometimes there's a story there. I wonder if there's a story here. Here's the poll I want to tell you about. The headline reads, "Record numbers of younger women want to leave the US. Desire to migrate among younger American women has quadrupled in the past decade." This is a new Gallup poll. It's a poll that Gallup has done over the course of more than a decade. So the context and the comparisons really matter here. 40% of women 15 to 44 years old say they would move abroad permanently if they had the opportunity. If they had the opportunity, they would leave the United States of America. 40% of women 15 to 44. That's 4 times higher than about a decade ago when the same question was asked. What's also interesting about this is that if you look at previous data, I'm going to show you a little bit of it, that sometimes you can see that there's not that much of a difference or divergence between genders. That maybe you see something different in a certain age group, but maybe not necessarily a divergence between genders. But in this case, there was a pretty significant divergence between men and women. It's clear that young women feel this way in America, where the men do not feel this way. This also applies, not equally, but very closely the same to whether the women are single or whether they're married. So that didn't change anything. Now, although the poll gives a lot of very interesting information, it doesn't provide one clear reason as to why this is. My question for you today is why? And can we actually learn something from the topics we're going to cover in the news today that maybe give us some insight? I'm going to talk to you about a couple things here. You might say to me, well, Jenna, this has to do with the political climate, clearly. One of the things the Gallup poll says is it's not that clear by the data. I'm showing something on the screen here that shows us some graphs so you can properly see US adults overall, women 15 to 44, men 15 to 44, women 45 plus, men 45 plus. Let me just read to you part of this poll. The percentage of younger women wanting to move to another country first rose decisively in 2016, the final year of President Barack Obama's second term. In that year, Gallup surveyed the US in June and July after both parties' presumptive nominees were set for the November election, which Donald Trump went on to win. Just a reminder here, though, because this is important, at the time of the poll, it was not clear who was going to win. President Trump wasn't the only one in the race. Hillary Clinton was in the race as well. Let me go on and read. Desire to migrate continued to climb afterwards. So after 2016, hitting 44% in President Joe Biden's last year in office and remaining near that level in 2025. So you can look at that and say, okay, well, wait a minute. It hit 44% in President Joe Biden's last year in office. It's Joe Biden's fault, President Biden's fault. Is it because President Biden was in office, or was it anticipation of what was to come next? Tough to know. You can't read it through these numbers. So you could read the data each way. And it's a reminder about how data can do tricks depending on what sort of narrative you want to fulfill. So if I wanted to say, man, this is President Biden's fault, this is the Democrats' fault, I could say, listen, this happened, started to move under a Democrat administration and peaked during a Democrat administration. But both of those years were anticipation of another election. So which way do you want to slice it? How, what does that look like? You could go either direction. I love stuff that can go either direction. It makes us think. All right. So what Gallup said is this suggests a broader shift in opinion among younger women rather than a solely partisan one. And that's something that this polling really wanted to make sure to show, which is that it didn't seem like you could easily explain it just by one answer. I'm going to share one with you, but here's another look at women versus men, 15 to 44. So there's definitely a change. Something happens in 2014, 2015, it starts to rise for women, which were, by the way, lower than men previously. And you can see this spike that happens for women in this age group in recent years. Here's one of the reasons that Gallup provided as something to think about. And it's this: younger American women have lost more confidence in institutions than any other group in the past decade. So this includes, the judicial system, the national government, the honesty of elections, the military, goes on and on. So that's something notable, that women in this age group have lost a great deal of confidence in these institutions, and we're not seeing the same in men. One could think, well, maybe younger Americans just, they don't have a lot of faith in a lot of institutions. That doesn't sound that new, but it's not. It's specifically for women. So where do these women want to go? This also surprised me. Let me just read this to you. What has not changed is where these younger women would like to go. Canada remains the top preferred destination for younger American women looking to leave. That destination is ahead of New Zealand, Italy, and Japan. I mean, would those be your places too if you were going to leave? So, just a personal note, one of our colleagues for SmartHER News, she actually, single woman, has citizenship, dual citizenship. She actually moved abroad recently. She's no longer working in the United States. That's a representation that we're seeing in the Gallup poll. I have another former colleague of mine who has 3 kids that decided to live abroad for at least a year with her children because she wanted a different experience and expose them to something else. So I actually see this in my own life. Don't worry, right now SmartHER News is still based in Texas. However, maybe Canada, guys. I don't know. I just I was like, "Really? Canada? Okay. Well, no offense to Canadians. I just didn't know that that was going to be on the top of the list. I thought, I don't know. Maybe I'm just missing out." Let's take a look at the topics we're going to cover today. We're going to cover politics. We're going to cover crimes in cities, Nigeria, special status for Nigeria, artificial intelligence, what's happening in Venezuela, where our military is going, border numbers, beef prices, grocery prices, tariffs, and Epstein. Does that tell us anything about how the American woman might feel about American society? Would those news items hit an American woman different than an American man? I don't have an answer to that. I'm curious what you think. Why do American women matter? We know them, we love them, of course. But remember, more American women vote than American men. We vote at higher rates than men. So not only do we make up the majority of voters, we vote at a higher rate than men do. We also are the number one consumer of household goods and the number one economy in the entire world. So we affect the global economy and we affect the global leadership in the United States through elections. In fact, just one article I read over the weekend talked about the importance of women voters in this off-year election. So this is why this is a very interesting voting bloc. It's a very interesting group of American women. Why do they feel that way? The poll also said it's not that they had plans to leave. It's just that if they had the opportunity, they would go. What do you guys think about this? Why do you think this is happening? I see our live chat. I have 60 comments already on the live chat about this. I'm very curious to see what you guys think about it. Uh, we have some questions about Canada. No offense. No offense. We're not trying to, we love Canada. By the way, Canadians loved Smarter News. We had a big contingent in Canada, but recent changes to social media laws prevented our content from being seen in Canada. And it can only be seen in limited ways on social media. True story. Actually affected our business. So just a reminder about the free press. Okay. So why it all takes place. All right. I'm gonna let you guys kind of sound off in the live chat, but I am curious to hear from others as we get your feedback. It'd be a really great podcast. If you guys want to send us a voice note about what you think the reason is for this, you can do so. hello@smarternews.com. You can direct message me as well on social media. Pick up your phone, send me a voice note. Tell me why you think this is. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think it's warranted? What do you think? I know. One of us, Haley, says, wanting to leave doesn't mean they will leave. That's true. Maybe it's too much Instagram. We see everyone doing their travel vlogs, and we just feel like that's where we need to be. So I don't know. I don't want to make it sound lighter than it should be. I do think that's pretty fascinating to see the difference between men and women, and also such a large portion of women. All right, let's talk a little bit about what's happening in the news and get into some of the nitty-gritty. That's a technical term. Congress is back in action. They're going to get into the nitty-gritty this week, meaning that we're going to be back to hearings. We're going to be back to a series of these different topics that I just mentioned. So there's going to be hearings about crimes in some of American cities. There is going to be another hearing about what's going on in Nigeria. There's been a lot of talk about that, about whether or not there is a genocide happening in Nigeria targeting Christians. We actually have a podcast that's coming out this week with Holly McKay, war correspondent, writer, investigative reporter, who is working her contacts in Africa to ask about what's really going on there. It's a fascinating conversation, not exactly what you may think it is based on some of the headlines that you're seeing. So highly encourage you to check that out. But Congress is going to be taking a look at that. Also, there's going to be a conversation happening on artificial intelligence. I was just at a event this weekend in Austin, a big festival. The Texas Tribune puts on a big festival in Austin, and one of the panels where everyone was gathered around listening to lawmakers and political figures talk was about AI. And this is a big topic of conversation about what this means for all of us, and not only in the political realm, but obviously otherwise. One of the other big news items that we're taking a look at is the USS Gerald Ford, the largest aircraft carrier that we have in the US military, is now going to be in the region close to Venezuela. We know that there's been a lot of military assets around that area of the Caribbean, and the US military has done so and continues to do training exercises in Trinidad and Tobago, which is an island just 7 miles off the coast of Venezuela. There's been all sorts of questions about what this is about. The US military, the Department of War, continues to say that we are targeting narco terrorists. And that title is applied because, as you know, when the Trump administration came into office, they started to designate these cartels as foreign terrorist organizations. There has been a lot of questions about the intel around all of this. This will be a topic of conversation for Congress. The president just said last night, as he was getting off his plane and going into the White House, that talks with Venezuela may happen, that he'd be open to talking with Venezuela. The question is, what are they talking about? What does the United States really want from Venezuela? Is it about this drug trafficking? And that's all? Is there something else going on? Venezuela at one time was a thriving economy. It's thought to have some of the largest, if not the largest, it depends on the research that you look at, petroleum reserves, oil reserves in the world. And one has to ask, well, what could these conversations even be about? There's been questions about further military action by the United States. That's because we're moving military assets in the region. Those questions are going to be asked. And the administration continues to say this is about narco-terrorism. This is a story to watch, and one will continue to do so. There's also the question, though, about, well, how many drugs are actually just coming across the border that aren't coming through these boats off the coast of Venezuela that, quite frankly, we have not talked a lot about here at Smart News over the last several years. What we have talked about, and I'm going to show this to you, is what's going on at the U.S. border And what's interesting is that we actually just got some new numbers on the US border uh, about nationwide encounters. These are report card numbers, I call them. Once a month, we get these numbers that tell us, well, how many encounters happened at our US borders. And this has long been looked at as a barometer to understand, well, what does that situation look like? In previous years, for any given month, we could see 100,000, 200,000, crossing 300,000 people that have been encountered on any given month. What we've seen under the Trump administration, and obviously a lot of different policies, is much lower numbers. And so if we compare what we're seeing in October of this year to last year, we saw just over 30,500 encounters in October alone. We say encounters because the people that are encountered by Border Patrol may or may not be arrested and taken into custody. They may actually be immediately removed. They may be allowed to pursue asylum in some cases and given probation. Under the Trump administration, that has not happened as frequently, but that's why we continue to use this term encounters. If we look at October of last year, we were at 142,000, just over 700. So massively different than last year at the same time. One of the things I do want to point out to you, though, is that as we saw Trump come into office, the Trump administration come into office in January, we've seen a decline of encounters over the last year. And really, this number has sort of hovered around 29,000, 25,000, 26,000 in September. What was notable to me about October is one, still a historically very low number, no comparison to last year, 2025, and that 142,000 number. No comparison to the year before, 2024, we had 309,000 encounters. I mean, a huge number. So no comparison to that. Without a doubt, historically low, but several thousand higher than what we've seen over the last several months in October. So there could be all sorts of reasons for that. I will reach out to Customs and Border Protection and ask. We can ask the Department of Homeland Security. We can always ask a question about that. What is that about? Where do we see an uptick? What was the profile of that person? Were these families trying to come across the border? Was it more favorable weather than the summer months that are really hot along the border where we see a lot of action? Those things can actually matter more than you think. And so just something to keep an eye on. Historically low, slightly higher than previous months, so we'll keep an eye on it. The other thing I wanna mention to you is just about pricing overall. Affordability has been a huge topic of conversation, and this is linked to what's going on in the border, so let me just connect the dots a little bit for you. One of the things that we've talked about is the screw worm. You remember we talked about this? It's a parasitic fly that can infect cattle, and there's been great concern about this parasitic fly getting closer to the US southern border and affecting southern states where we see a lot of big ranches. Not the only places we see big ranches in America, but where some big ranches are. So there's been a concerted effort by the US Department of Agriculture to try to kind of figure that out, right? We don't want an infestation that could affect not only cattle, but it could affect all sorts of things that we don't want. So there's a focus on the border because of that. There's also just kind of a question though about beef prices overall. And so we hear from members of the Trump administration, and I heard about this from the White House economic advisor, heard about this from the Treasury Secretary in interviews this weekend saying, hey, beef prices are really affected because of this infestation of parasitic flies that's happening, that's creating some stress among beef prices in the cattle market. But if you talk to cattle ranchers, they say, well, actually, there's been all sorts of problems with beef prices over the last several years. We have drought, we have smaller herds, we had the bird flu that was also affecting cattle. So there's a lot of dynamics at play in our pricing. And because we're talking a lot about affordability, I'm noticing that everyone wants a quick answer, right? Like, oh, these prices are up because of this. We kind of got into that with egg prices. Well, the prices are up because of bird flu. Yes, bird flu absolutely affected egg prices. There were other dynamics at play too. There are a lot of things that go into the price that we're actually paying in the store. Beef prices are a place to watch because similar to egg prices, people sort of know what they want to pay or what things cost. And especially as we get into the holidays, we're feeding families. It's something to keep an eye on. What could help beef prices, but also support American cattle farmers. That seems to be a topic of conversation for the administration and one to watch. The administration on Friday put out an announcement that they were adjusting tariffs on a few household goods. Tell me if you use any of these: coffee, tea. bananas, tropical fruit, wood, and iron. And so the Trump administration said that they're peeling back some of these tariffs. Whether or not that will make these items more affordable in the immediate, we've seen a big, spike in coffee prices, for example, is a big question because even with some of that pressure removed, the question remains about when that savings, if any, gets passed along to you in grocery stores now that we've paid a higher price. We've seen that with eggs, though, that egg prices have come down from where we were last year at the same time. But the question is, even with these moves by the administration, how much can the government overall affect affordability in a free market is a much tougher question that both Democrats and Republicans tend to shy away from a little bit because it shows the limitation of the power of the government. I mean, the government's not setting prices. It's one of the arguments to not have the government involved in things like student loans, for example, or healthcare, because it can affect the prices. That's one argument against it. The other argument is, well, we need the government involved in some of these areas in order to make a more level playing field or to create better access or better policy. So there's arguments on both sides, but just watch this area because what we saw from the administration dropping these tariffs is a reminder a lot of the negotiations with countries is still taking place over the tariffs. You still have the Supreme Court with a pending decision about whether or not it's legal what the Trump administration is doing, levying these tariffs in the way that they're doing it. So there's a lot of flux to the economy. And I know that doesn't feel great, but I feel like no one's really saying that in the news. Like these are what the facts are suggesting. There's just a lot of I mean, there's always a lot of factors that play in the economy. But take any single one of those and say, let's say that we get a ruling from the Supreme Court that changes the Trump administration policies. Even if that changes, how much that affects our reality in the grocery store is sort of another question. So there's a lot happening for the American family and with the realities that we are facing. Healthcare costs, affordability when it comes to food. I saw an article on electricity prices. So we're seeing lower gas prices, but electricity prices have been going up. People have been noticing that. There's a question about technology. So there's a lot. We're in a time where there's a lot of technological changes that are taking place, and we have still a new administration that's trying to set their policies. And they have this very finite period before we really get into the first couple months of next year where they're still new. And then you can start to see the media starting to change their questions. Every time there's a reference to the Biden administration, you're going to hear journalists and others say, yeah, yeah, yes, but this is now your economy, or this is your inflation numbers, or this is your policy now that we're seeing play out. And so it's just these are obviously a very big story to continue to watch. I pulled a couple sound bites. I just want to play this one very briefly from President Trump, and it was about healthcare. Obviously, super big topic that we were talking about all throughout the shutdown because of this question about subsidies, government subsidies, and the pricing for American families. They're signing up for healthcare during this time period. President Trump, when he was heading back to the White House last night, said this, and I just want to play this for you because sometimes you hear something and you're like, I wonder if this is a story that'll continue to grow. This could be a dead end, or it could be something that could this continue to grow. This idea. Take a listen to this.
I said, why don't we just pay this money directly to the people of our countries and let them buy their own health insurance? And I made that statement, and I made it a little bit cavalierly, but it sounded good. And everybody has picked it up, including Democrats. And I am talking to some Democrats right now about doing that. People love it. We're going to take the money, well, if it gets approved, we're going to take the money, we're going to pay it back to the people of our country to go out and buy health insurance. Now, they can put it in a health account. We can do it a lot of different ways. But they buy their own health insurance. They can negotiate price. And it's going to be locked, so they can't go out and buy a Cadillac. They can go out and buy health insurance.
So no Cadillac for you, but health insurance, maybe. Okay. This was the idea that President Trump, as he mentioned, sort of talked about in just like instead of giving subsidies to insurance companies, why don't we just give the money to the American people, a certain group, a certain income level, so that they can more actively negotiate on their own behalfs because they're as a consumer, they have the power to decide like what healthcare they want. Now, there's a question about what would the quality of that healthcare be, and it's not quite as simple as we're just going to give people money and then everything's going to be fine, right? There's a lot of dynamics at play, but that idea is not, it doesn't seem to be going away. And he said that he's talked to some Democrats. So I just wonder how fruitful those conversations have been. One more quick soundbite, too, as well, that he said last night, and then we're going to get to some of the Epstein news in just a moment. But I wanted you to hear this because I was surprised to hear this as well.
The mayor of New York, I will say, would like to meet with us and we'll work something out. But he would like to come to Washington and meet, and we'll work something out. We want to see everything work out well for New York.
So, a little bit more of a conciliatory tone from President Trump on the election of Zohran Mamdani in New York City. A Democrat socialist, obviously has been a lightning rod for controversy among a lot of different political circles, including some Democrats, because of this question about the socialist label with a young mayor in the largest city in the United States. And so to hear, well, there could be a White House meeting is news. Hadn't heard that a lot of places, so I wanted to play that for you. All right. Shall we dig into Epstein a little bit here? Because there was a flurry of activity about this right after the shutdown. And I did a short video. You could see this on social media. I actually had just done it on Instagram stories, and I had such a reaction that people asked that we put it on the feed, which we did, which was sort of interesting timing because of what happened afterwards. And so let me just back up a little bit. There's like the far history of Epstein, and then there's the recent history. I feel like the recent history just over the last several days is a little hard to follow the bouncing ball on. So let's just start there for a moment. So we had this government shutdown. During the government shutdown, the House of Representatives is not in session. Speaker Johnson did not have any business that he was doing during that time. And there's could be an argument for why. I mean, the lawmakers, like the government, the federal government is supposed to be shut down. Lawmakers do get paid because they're paid through the US Constitution. But he made the decision that they're not going to be actively in session, voting on bills or doing hearings or anything like that. So there's an argument for why to not do that because otherwise you're stressing a system, right? That is already being stressed. There's a lack of funding. But there were those that were accusing him of playing politics with that because there was a new lawmaker that needed to be sworn in that would be a deciding vote on behalf of those in the House of Representatives to vote on a very unique petition to force the House to vote on an issue. So really, when you're the House of Representatives, the Speaker gets. This is why the majority party matters. Like, they get to decide, like what is going to be the agenda, what's going to be the business, and if there's enough lawmakers that want to break with the majority, they have to do something called a discharge petition that basically gets enough votes to force a vote, sort of generally speaking. So this lawmaker's waiting to get sworn in. And there were those critics of Speaker Johnson saying, well, the House isn't in session just to keep her from being sworn in to stop an additional vote on Jeffrey Epstein. Why is this? Because there's a bipartisan effort in the House. Thomas Massey, a Republican, Ro Khanna, a Democrat, have gotten together with others supporting them saying they want to pass legislation that would force the Justice Department to release more information about the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. This law would require the Justice Department to do so. This came after the Justice Department essentially said, there's not much to see here, folks. Yes, the administration had promised coming in, we're going to have all this daylight on this Jeffrey Epstein mysterious investigation. And then there was a reversal. The Justice Department essentially said, we've looked through this. We don't think there's a there. So we're not going to release more information. So this catalyzed a group that's bipartisan to say, yeah, that's not good enough for us. We actually want to see. We want to see for ourselves why there's not more information coming out about this particular topic. Okay, so that's a little background into just what's happening in the shutdown. But as the government reopens last week, Democrats release a tranche of information related to emails, the Jeffrey Epstein investigation that some members of Congress had access to. Then the House Oversight Committee, with the majority led by Republicans, also released 20,000 emails that were part of their investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. So you're getting like a flood of information regarding Jeffrey Epstein just as the government is reopening. And so this is suddenly something that the White House has to respond to and that the press jumps on immediately. So my critique on this, just to kind of give you my perspective on the way that politics and the press can have an unhealthy relationship. This was definitely a strategic choice by both of these groups to try to get out in front of this Jeffrey Epstein issue. Okay, we're going to be back in session. Let's force this vote. We see Republicans breaking with the White House. You have certain lawmakers that have a political agenda, or they really want more on this particular issue. They're going to move forward before the midterm elections. You see all these sort of different political dynamics at play. And yes, there are a huge group of victims at the center of this story, more than 1,000, according to the Justice Department, that are being mentioned in this conversation too. But there's a lot of politics underfoot. And so as a member of the press, I've seen this play out over and over again, where you have politicians put forward a story, and the press chases it immediately without asking the question, is this what my audience really would like to hear about at this very moment? And that's the question I actually asked on social media, which is this what the American people wanted prioritized? During the shutdown, we talked about really big issues, affordability of what's going on with housing prices, prices, and healthcare. These are issues that affect the American people every single day. These are very difficult issues. And because of that, they can be less salacious or interesting than headlines that are related to a more salacious case like the Jeffrey Epstein case. Now, I believe the Jeffrey Epstein case has a lot of questions. There are more than 1,000 victims. There are all sorts of questions about how this man had so much access to so many powerful people and what's really going on with this investigation. I mean, this is a big story. Don't get me wrong. My question was, should it be prioritized in the way it was prioritized just hours after the government reopened? With the government reopening, is that exactly what the American people wanted to focus on? And that was a question that I posed. So some say yes, others said no, that they hadn't thought about it. And that's what I was reflecting through some of my conversations with all of you on Smarter News, which is I hadn't gotten a lot, had some questions about the Epstein files, always do. But as far as like the matter of priority for you and your family, that hadn't been at the top of the list over the last several weeks. So I was sort of shocked about how easily the politicians just put this out there. The entire press corps just goes and follows it. And we're not saying, okay, well, let's talk a little bit about this, because there are some things to remind ourselves as we're looking for more information about this investigation. And again, there's many people that are looking for this. And I just want to mention this before I play a little sound from some of the people involved and pull some sound from Republicans so you can see how different they are on this particular issue. So one thing I just want to remind you is that in an investigation, an active investigation that's ongoing, even if Congress passes a law that requires the Justice Department to release information, if there's an active investigation, the likelihood is the Justice Department does not have to release information on an active investigation. This is going to become important in just a moment. I'll explain more on this. So, yes, Congress can vote on this, which we expect them to do on Tuesday. And we expect right now, although this could change, that there will be enough votes in the House that this legislation to compel the Justice Department to release more information will pass. But then there's a huge question about whether or not it will actually ever see the light of day in the Senate. If there's enough political pressure, the Senate could potentially vote on this. If there's not, the Senate may not vote on it because Republicans have the majority. Even if the Senate votes on it and it becomes law passed by the House and the Senate, the president would still have to sign it. He still would have veto power. Even if this becomes the law of the land, the Justice Department has an argument to say if there's an investigation ongoing, we don't have to release ongoing investigatory, if that's the correct word, material, because this is an investigation that's taking place. So then there's a question about the quality of material that's actually released. The other thing that's really important in the American justice system, as you know, any number of us could be under investigation and not know it, or we could be named in an investigation. Have you ever been, part of an office that there was some sort of criminal investigation or civil lawsuit, or in a neighborhood where something like that happens. I mean, maybe there was a party that you once were at one time and there was something that a fight that happened later on. Your name could come up in an investigation just because your name is part of an investigation, or even if someone alleges criminal activity in an investigation, that doesn't mean that you're guilty. Obviously, there's certain cases where you read something as part of an investigation, it's hard not to deduce that someone's guilty. But it is a reminder in the American justice system that people are innocent until proven guilty. And that's why investigations matter before getting to a court of law. So there's a lot of focus on names related to the Jeffrey Epstein investigations. What we've seen over the last several days is that Jeffrey Epstein had correspondence with a lot of people, Democrats, Republicans, high profile politicians, writers, leaders, businessmen, all sorts of people. Just because they had a correspondence with him, we don't really know the nature of the relationship or how much that matters. Right now, it's much easier to run with the story and say, look at all these names of these individuals. Quite frankly, the names are shocking. But we have to also show discipline that just because you're named in an investigation doesn't mean you're guilty of something and doesn't necessarily mean you're relevant. So that's something that with all of these emails, I feel like that's also really getting lost. And then let's just talk about the victims for a moment, because in all of this, there are clearly people that were absolutely hurt, lives changed forever because of the actions of Jeffrey Epstein. He faced charges because of that. But he got this, just to remind you, sort of a, I don't want to say sort of, it was a very odd, unusual deal that he was able to finagle in Florida back in 2007, 2008. So the case was between 2005 and 2008. As part of this agreement, we've been over this, but just a reminder, he basically gets what he argues is immunity from any further federal prosecution, which then for many years, that's almost the end of anything we hear about Jeffrey Epstein. It wasn't until 2019, and it was a new media investigation by a Miami-based journalist that started looking at this and being like, "What the heck what happened here?" Which then gave permission, essentially gave permission for the federal government, federal prosecutors to say, "We're gonna challenge that plea deal. And there's enough information here to go after this guy," which is what they were doing when Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide in prison, according to the government. I know there are those that have questions about whether or not he did. Either way, he was found dead in his jail cell in 2019. A lot of the victims that we have heard from or have been listed in connection to these cases, just according to media reports, I'm not saying that these are all of them, but just so you have some clarity, go back to 1994 to 2004. And because of that, we haven't seen a ton of more additional cases. There have been some that have tried to bring their cases to a court of law, um, depending on where they live, their age at the time when these crimes happened or alleged crimes happened. They could run up against the statute of limitations. Also, there's a question of just time and resources, money that allow someone to pursue a case against someone's estate or against an individual. But we didn't see, from that time period of 2008 on, he was released from jail in 2009. We didn't see a huge flood of cases against him and Jeffrey Epstein, I'm talking about. So there's time lost in this for these victims too. And what the question is for right now, and I'm trying to say this with a degree of sensitivity, which is sometimes what's right and what feels like justice runs up against a timeline in the American judicial system. And we're sort of in that time period. So Congress is working on this to get more information, some of Congress, but whether or not that information could lead to more cases is a complete unknown. There seems to be this run to, if we get this information by those that want it, then all of these people are going to be exposed and these, criminal cases could happen against them, or they'll feel the retribution of their actions, which seems to be more like the court of public opinion versus a court of law. And as long as you're aware of that, that's what's most important to me. It's not whether or not what's right or wrong. It's just a question of what does winning look like here for the victims at this time? What does that look like for them? And then we have to ask a more skeptical question, which is what does winning look like for the different uh, politicians, many of whom have been in office over a great deal of time period, not all of them, but a great deal of time period, where at any other moment they could have brought up the Jeffrey Epstein case and advocated too, but they're choosing this particular political moment to do it. Now, Thomas Massey, who's been on the forefront of this, says this is about the victims for him and about exposing what actually happened here. Although he's very, you're going to hear from him. He says he doesn't know if the president's implicated at all. He just feels like that they're getting the runaround and he doesn't like it. So here's what Thomas Massey, who's the leader of this group in the House that's moving this legislation forward, here's what he's saying about this issue.
I think we could have a deluge of Republicans. There could be 100 or more. I'm hoping to get a veto-proof majority on this legislation when it comes up for a vote. And, the president's been saying this is a hoax. He's been saying that for months. Well, he's just now decided to investigate a hoax, if it's a hoax. And I have another concern about these investigations that he's announced. If they have ongoing investigations in certain areas, those documents can't be released. So this might be a big smokescreen, these investigations, to open a bunch of them as a last-ditch effort to prevent the release of the Epstein files. It's a small world. Dogs don't bark at parked cars, and we are winning. I'm not tired of winning yet, but we are winning. And not only the speaker, but the attorney general, the FBI director, and the president himself and the vice president, they're taking a big loss this week because after months of fighting, I am winning this week with Ro Khanna. We're forcing this vote, and it's going to happen. I would remind my Republican colleagues who are deciding how to vote, Donald Trump can protect you in red districts right now by giving you an endorsement, but in 2030, he's not going to be the president, and you will have voted to protect pedophiles if you don't vote to release these files, and the president can't protect you then. This vote, the record of this vote, will last longer than Donald Trump's presidency.
Okay. So you hear it. That's Thomas Massey, you mapping out his argument. What do you think the president had to say about that? Let's take a listen to President Trump.
Team probe you are calling for could be a smoke screen to block the release of more files. Is that the case?
Well, I don't want to talk about it because fake news like you're a terrible reporter, and fake news like they just keep bringing that up to deflect from the tremendous success of the Trump administration. So a guy like Massey, his poll numbers are showing he's at 6% approval rating right now. And we call him Rand Paul Jr. because he never votes for the Republican Party. So they're using Jeffrey Epstein as a deflection from the tremendous success that we're having as a party.
President said they want to talk.
Okay, so that's what President Trump has to say. Let me just play for you one more piece of sound. This is from Senator Barrasso. He's a Republican in the Senate. So remember, right now, you're going to have a lot of conversation between the people in the House and the White House. And there's going to be this flurry of activity because we expect this vote on Tuesday, tomorrow. But then there's a question about the Senate. So what are Republican senators saying about this? Here's Senator John Barrasso.
Look at that. But we want transparency and accountability. What I also know is that Jeffrey Epstein is a convicted sex offender and he is dead. And President Trump threw him out of Mar-a-Lago 21 years ago. To me, what's going on with the Epstein, what's going on also with the shutdown is this is the Democrats trying to appeal to their far left base and trying to change the topic from a failed shutdown, which hurt many, many Americans, like a lot of people I was with last night at a veterans event in Wyoming where they wanted to talk about the pain each one of them experiences in the shutdown, and Epstein never came up for discussion.
But Senator, so one of the things that Senator Barrasso said is that he believes this is very politically motivated by Democrats to this term of turning President Trump into a lame duck president early in his term, essentially strip some power away from him and make it less about the White House, quite frankly, and more about what's happening in Congress. That's almost a political debate that just is sort of happening. But I want you to hear different voices because there's a lot of different voices on the Hill about what direction this needs to go. And then a question that needs to naturally be asked, which is, this is your time and money. So is this being spent in the right way for the American people, with all due respect to the victims? Kathy had this question, which I think is important. Couldn't the defense lawyers compel the information as part of their lawsuit? Kathy, I think you're talking about what's going on with the potential ongoing litigation related to Jeffrey Epstein. That's the point that I was trying to make, which is that ongoing litigation right now, we're not seeing these new cases coming forward. And we don't know the reason why for that. If there's more than 1,000 victims, we have to ask that question. Is it because some of these crimes were committed in some cases more than 20 years ago? Allegedly. They always say allegedly, correct? Right. All the allegations, they're spanning several decades. Are they up against a statute of limitation? Is there a limit of evidence that would allow someone to actually try to seek prosecution? Is that part of the problem? And is that evidence potentially in these documents held by the Justice Department that politically may not find it expedient? Yes, the Justice Department is supposed to follow the law of the land and have no politics involved. But we know politics and the Justice Department being intertwined has been a huge conversation topic over the last several years. And so that's one of the questions. Is there is there data? Is there evidence? Is there something in here that would empower these victims to come forward and have more litigation, have their day in court? And is that being suppressed by those in power trying to serve others that are in powerful positions? That's really at the heart of all of this. But we don't see that litigation. I don't have a bunch of cases that I'm like, okay, here's the 75 cases that victims now that are in different stages of challenge right now. And they're trying to get to the Justice Department to get this or that or the other thing. That sort of active litigation we're not seeing. And we just have to ask the question as to why. It doesn't seem like there's any sort of a doubt. I like to keep everything like, here's one side, here's another side, here's something to think about. With Jeffrey Epstein, it doesn't seem like there's any doubt at all that not only was he a convicted criminal, which is a fact, a convicted sex offender, that he was involved in nefarious activities of all sorts. And the stories that you hear from those that were around him are horrific. And this is where we have to, as journalists, have an honest conversation with our audience about what does justice look like in the American justice system? Can it be found in court, or is it going to be pursued in a different way? Whether it's public opinion, and that has a negative connotation, but whether or not that your story can come out and that you have a right to your story and that you're able to tell it. And so these are the uncomfortable parts of the Jeffrey Epstein story that sits in front of us right now, that I even see in the media is just being used. It's just being used for clickbait and, the Democrat leaning, left leaning media is using it one way. The conservative media is using it another way. There's witch hunts, there's hoaxes, there's this, there's that, the other thing. I just wonder if the American public is being heard through all of this. And if you believe this topic has to be tackled and moved out of the way so that we can move on to the next thing, totally your prerogative. But I just want to make sure that we're thinking about this critically and we're covering the multiple facts of this very, very difficult, very, very tough topic. So the things to watch for, what are we going to see on Tuesday? Thomas Massie and others, Congressman Massie says he definitely has the votes. And here's what's to watch on this. Do Republicans see, now that the president came out, by the way, that's an important news item I failed to mention. President came out on Sunday night and he said, I think the Justice Department should just release everything. We have nothing to hide, which is a reversal. So who knows? Okay. Like, who knows what's really going on there? The question here is, what did the votes actually look like? Number one, does it pass? Seems like it will, but let's see. And if it is true, what Thomas Massie says, that 100 Republicans could sign on, then we're in a whole different story, because that shows a rising tide of bipartisan support for more information. I just want to make sure that we're clear that more information doesn't necessarily mean that we have the answers that everybody is looking for or wants. But I'm all for more data. I'm always for more information. So it just seems like there's a lot of politics at play in the middle of this too. I just want to make sure that we're aware of it. And Christina's raising a really interesting point. The Republicans are the ones who ran on this. So that's why it's interesting. You're right, Christina. So, part of the reason why this story even got the attention is because the Trump administration and Republicans said, this has been hidden from us. The Epstein files, what actually happened there, this has been hidden from the American public. It's the elite and those in political power that are hiding it. And we're going to make sure that the American public knows about it. And then when the Justice Department got into office, the leadership said, Yeah, we look through it and we don't think there's anything there. We think everybody that should be prosecuted has been prosecuted, that there was evidence to have cases against them, and the rest unfortunately, we don't think that there's anything else. It was like a 1.5-page document. We did a podcast at the time that it was released because it was sort of shocking. You're like, "That's all?" It was just a reversal. So that was the catalyst that led to some Republicans to say, "Hey, wait a minute. We're supporting this administration, like, we're gonna need more than that." And this is what really started this. So you do see Democrats and Republicans coming together in a unique way here, and, really sort of this break within the Republican Party ahead of the midterm elections. You have those that are firmly in President Trump's camp and right in step with him and what he wants to talk about. And then you have these others that are saying, yes, but wait a minute, this is what the American people really wanted. This is how we thought this administration would be different. And we believe in some of these policy priorities of this administration, but on this we don't agree with it. This is what Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is talking a lot about. One time a fervent Trump supporter who's now saying, listen, I still support President Trump, but I don't support him on this. And she's incurred the wrath of the President Trump because of that. So interesting dynamics, a lot to think about. I want to play you one last soundbite as I leave you. Reince Priebus used to be part of the Trump administration in the past. He's been part of the Republican Party for a long time. And he's, just so you can get the setting, this is on ABC, he's on a panel. He says something very interesting, and then he kind of says something that tails off at the end about how there maybe needs to be a different path forward for some of these victims. Just take a listen to this. I thought this was one of those things that could easily pass by, but there might be something here.
Guys, division is profit in America. And if you're dividing and you have money that you make and you get clicks online and you're fundraising, Marjorie Taylor Greene is one of the biggest fundraisers in the Republican Party.
Next to Donald
and she's
Trump.
Actually, yeah, of
All
course,
right.
because he's president of the United States.
Wait, I've got
to be clear,
Yeah.
What I think what we should be talking about, as Donna did, is number one, the victims.
Yeah.
I don't think there should be special treatment for the elite, but I think that there should be a process in place for protecting victims as well that don't want
Okay,
to name
so
police.
I want to move on. I want to move on to another
Okay, so we got cut off there. He said there should be a panel and a judge involved, another path forward for victims to talk. That may lead us down in an entirely, I don't even know what that would look like. But Congress has a variety of different ways that they can investigate. So one wonders, just listen to that one more time.
But these guys, division is profit in America.
Division is profit in America. I just want you to think about that as you go into this week. Division is profit, division is profit, division is profit. And think about how that moves people on social media or gets them to click, gets them to watch, gets them activated. And think about the economy that's created around that. Just think about it. It's one of the things that we're trying to work against at SmartHER News, and it's a tough current to swim against. Because everybody else can do it and you can do it easily. You can do it really well. At Fox News, I remember in these editorial meetings, there would be these conversations about, well, what is the red meat topic of the day? Just like the viewers are lions and all you need to do is like throw them a piece of red meat for, your panel to tear apart and get people angry about it and then go to commercial. And that's going to be a way to get viewers. I hated that. I thought, well, how is that productive for anybody? Like, what are we actually learning when we're reporting the news if we're doing that? Division is profit. So just keep that in mind. I don't know exactly what it means or how it applies across the board, but to me, when I heard that, I thought, division is profit. Think about the fundraising emails you get. Think about what's being put on social. Always have to follow the money. All right, guys, a lot there. Thanks for hanging with me. Got another busy week ahead of us. Curious your thoughts and look forward to hearing from you as always. hello@smarternews.com. It's a great way you can email us, direct message us on Instagram. Great way to get us. And always want to make sure we're responding to what you believe are some of the biggest stories in your life so that we can be helpful to you during this time. That's what the news is about. It's customer service. It's citizen service, although, we're a business. It's about making sure that we're making your life better, not the other way around. And so if you have questions, you have comments, I want to hear them, but always curiosity over commentary. It's one of our taglines, curiosity over commentary. Every time you feel like you maybe want to lead with a comment, maybe ask a question. You'll be surprised about what comes next. And curiosity really is an exercise of our liberty. So more as we get it. We'll see what happens this week in the House with the Epstein vote. What happens next after that is going to be a big story. And I'll keep you updated on all the big news of the week. All right, guys, have a great week. I'll talk to you later. Bye. Thank you for believing in quick, concise, nonpartisan, smarter news. Every time you join us or share or save our content, you help us build a solution in news, and we are so grateful. We have a few other ways you can support our mission, from joining our insider community Scoop, to shopping our gear at our SmartHER shop, to just telling a friend. The best way to do any of this is to visit smarternews.com or follow us at SmartHER News on social media. Don't worry, we put all of this in the captions so it's easy for you. Plus, we added our email just in case you want to drop us a note. We always love hearing from you. Thank you for helping us deliver news smarter.